It is a great day to be alive, and I am so thankful for God, Jesus Christ, who lives in us. Today's video is titled October 10th, Derived Date, What Actually Happened. Before we get started, I'm not a financial advisor. Nothing that I'm sharing is financial advice. I'm simply sharing dreams, visions, and interpretations that I feel God has given me as it relates to crypto. Now, let's get into the video. So in a previous video, I shared titled Tether Collapse in XRP Timeline Connection. I shared two sets of dates. One of those dates was October 10th. And I want to take the time to go through this video to share what actually happened on those days and to also make all of the October 10th connections, some that I shared, others that just come about as time went by. And I also want to share those to kind of draw a conclusion as to why God was revealing this date of October 10th. As you see here in this particular video, I shared that it came across as a derived date twice, October 10th, but there was more. So I shared the connection that I felt God was showing me between Tether and XRP. I know a lot took place on Friday, October the 10th, but I want to say thank you to everyone who has reached out about this particular date. I had not forgotten to do a video about what actually happened. It's just that so much was going on Friday, and it takes a little time to get these videos out. So thank you for the person who said that I noticed you were wondering in one of your videos if there might be a crash on the 10th, and today was maybe a heads up by the Lord for October 17th. So thank you to the individual who did make mention of this particular video. And so that's what we're going to do now. We're going to get into that. So the connections that I end up sharing is that I realized that one had to do with competition and the other had to do with the market crash timeline. In other words, one would rise and one would fall. Well, I shared the Tether dream in that particular video. So my Tether swing dream came after God had been revealing to me more about this market crash timeline. This dream just so happened to fall on a date that I knew was coming up, a date when I knew I was supposed to have a dream, and there it was, the Tether swing dream. So Tether became the first crypto coin that God revealed to me on this market crash timeline. So then after having my Tether dream, God began to reveal a connection, yet a difference between Tether and XRP. Again, one would rise and one would fall. At first, I was like, okay, God, so now I'm comparing a stable coin to a regular crypto coin. That's a little bit odd. But when I heard the news about Ripple announcing their stable coin shortly after having my Tether dream, it made more sense. Now I can see the competition between one stable coin, USDT, and the other stable coin for Ripple, RLUSD. Again, one will rise and one will fall. Next came the connection between the two. At this point, looking at all three dreams that I had on April the 10th and April the 11th, and I know when you say April 10th and April 11th, it sounds like 2 days, but this was actually like hours apart, like almost midnight going over into April the 11th. So I felt led to make a timeline specific to Tether. And this timeline will be derived based on what I saw in my Tether dream, people, their birthdays, the color of the key in the dream that I saw shortly after that, and putting it all together. There will be a timeline, and this would show the connection between Tether and XRP. Well, to my surprise, November 4th appeared on this Tether timeline. November 4th represents XRP. It is an indicator. One reason is because of Diddy's birthday. Another reason is because of a classmate's birthday, Val. She was the first person that God gave me this indication that November 4th is connected to XRP. And so when I saw this date of November 4th on this Tether timeline, it was confirmation that these two are connected. However, now XRP is officially on the market crash timeline because of its connections with Tether. This would explain why XRP collapsed in 2020 because of the SEC lawsuit. This would explain the XRP, the coin, the struggle in price action throughout the whole lawsuit with appeals. Whenever XRP would win a case, here come Gary Gensler and all of the appeals. And it will also explain why I saw XRP in the IBM dream. In the XRP IBM dream, I saw it at 70 cents. Yes, XRP would fall and struggle, but it would also rise. If you can recall, I mentioned in the XRP IBM dream, I saw XRP rising from 70 cents to $7 to $75. In addition to that, I shared my very first XRP dream where God showed me that the price of XRP would surpass what banks and institutions think the XRP is going to go, and that it is getting back on track and will take off in a short period of time. And that dream I had in June of 2024, just last year. So now that we know that XRP has a connection to Tether based on this Tether timeline, XRP is officially on the market crash timeline. It takes us to October 10th, that derived date that I shared in that video. That was the ending date to the Tether timeline. And the question that I asked was, will we hear news about Tether, or will we hear news about XRP on this date of October 10th? Well, October 10th rolled around and the Dow, S&P 500, NASDAQ plummet as Trump threatens massive increase on China tariffs. All of that stuff that went on Friday. In addition to that, news came out about how crypto market has hit a record of largest single day liquidation in history. And as you can see here in the yellow box, it's making comparisons to all of the major events that happened that has affected the crypto market. But on October 10th, it's been said that $19.1 billion was liquidated during this time, the biggest wipeout in crypto history. Another individual left this comment saying that XRP just crashed to 77 cents on Binance Exchange on Friday. I had someone else also send me an email about that. They went on to say that different exchanges had a different bottom, but Binance was the lowest. They noticed at 77 cents. Yes, I did come across this list of platforms where XRP flash crashed across these various platforms, and how Binance was the one to have the largest drop to 77 cents. When I saw that, I immediately thought about the IBM dream. With that being said, that is what we were looking at on October 10th as it relates to hearing news about Tether or XRP. Obviously, XRP flash crash was the big news. Now I want to move on to part two. Part two of October 10th, this date was derived a second time in this video. If you guys can recall the Diddy trial and Grayscale ETF timeline, I had talked about the date of October 10th as being one to look forward to after the Diddy case had come to an end. I also shared the relationship between Diddy and XRP. Diddy as being an indicator for XRP. When I hear news about Diddy, I'm looking to hear news to come out soon about XRP. And that has been the pattern that I've been seeing. So in most cases, the news for both are kind of similar. And I'll explain here as we go through what I mean by it being kind of similar. So here is the slide from that particular video where I shared this October 10th date as it relates to hearing news about Diddy, something about XRP. So getting straight to July 2nd, major news about Diddy came out. He was found not guilty on some of the major charges within his trial. Also at the same time, news came out on the same day, July 2nd, about Ripple seeking a U.S. banking license. And this banking license will come through the OCC certification. I saw two different things here. One, I saw something about a leak or something surfaced online where they had signed this document on June 30th. But July the 2nd is when it was, I guess, shared by Ripple that this application process had began. Doing some research, I saw that 120 days is the typical time it would take for this OCC certification or approval to take place. So 120 days. That would put this at October 28th or October the 30th to hear more about this approval. So this news came out for Ripple the same day that Diddy was found not guilty on some of the charges, which meant that his sentencing date would be October the 3rd. One additional thing to note about the OCC license. Again, Ripple was applying for a national trust bank charter. With this approval, the OCC will offer services like custody and fund management, potentially for its stablecoin RLUSD. This takes us back to the stablecoin competition, where now we're hearing about Ripple's next big steps at trying to gain their banking licenses. Also on July 2nd, we heard that Diddy wanted to try to make bail, but his bail was denied and he had to stay in jail. In addition to that, news came out about Grayscale. Grayscale had been given the green light for their conversions of GDLC into an ETF. However, they will also put in a stay on their ability to convert. So this conversion into ETFs, which also included XRP, had to stay, not able to do anything with it, just as Diddy had to stay in jail until his October 3rd sentencing. And this is what I mean by similar things take place between Diddy and XRP, similar outcomes. So this moves us to October 3rd, Diddy's sentencing day, and we found out that he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Now, I remind you guys of my Diddy dream. In the dream, he was happy, he was laughing, he was smiling. I was trying to tell him something. I was trying to warn him about something, but he would not let me talk. And all I could do in that moment was to grab his hand or arm or whatever it was, and I began to pray for him. Going back to July 2nd, when he was acquitted for those major charges, I know he felt happy and felt like smiling to a certain degree. Coming into his October 3rd sentencing date, I heard that he had already had something scheduled, some type of event scheduled as early as that Monday. I think his trial date or sentencing date was that Friday. And so he had something planned for that Monday events. It was supposed to be good things. But needless to say, he went into this on October 3rd, happy and very hopeful. And this is the part that I think, as far as my dream, I was trying to warn him. I feel like this would have been that warning portion. Yes, I see you happy, but I have a warning to give you. And I didn't know what that warning was in the dream. I just knew I had to warn him about something. And instead, because he would not let me talk, I decided to just pray for him instead. And so in the end, we saw him being sentenced to those 4 years in prison. So after this major Diddy news came out on October the 3rd, I knew that I should hear some news about XRP will be coming next. And it did. On October the 5th, news came out about the status of Ripple's application for the OCC. They applied for it on July 2nd. We already talked about that. But now you're able to see it publicly, their application, and it is still in the waiting for approval process. Again, that date, October 28th through the 30th. After hearing that big news, we heard news about Diddy. On October the 6th, there was news that Diddy had asked Trump for a pardon. And just like Ripple's OCC waiting for that approval, well, Diddy is also waiting for Trump's approval on whether or not he's going to pardon him. Now, because of this government shutdown, I'm hearing that everything as far as these ETFs coming out, there would be a wait just as long as the government is shut down. We'll be waiting. So lots of waiting between Diddy and XRP. And this brings us up to speed to October 10th, 2025. What news did we hear? Well, I did not hear any news pertaining to Diddy. The only thing that was floating around that I thought maybe we would hear some news about is maybe the pardon. Maybe there'll be yes or no. Something that was new, not on the 10th. This came out before the 10th. Diddy judge offered to cut his sentencing off by a year if he decided to complete his sentencing at a particular prison. But that was not news about Diddy on October 10th. However, on October 10th, we know what news we heard. That news was about the huge crash, all the liquidations that took place on October 10th, XRP flash crash. And so from this point, based on what we saw happen with XRP on October 10th, could this be a reflection of what's to come for Diddy as far as him being pardoned by President Trump? Would this idea collapse or come to a crash and he continues to serve the remainder of his sentencing, with an exception of maybe having a year taken off, depending on where he does the remaining of his sentencing? So that is where I am now with that. So that concludes the October 10th date as it relates to Diddy. That was one derived October 10th date. And we've already talked about the first one with Tether. Now we're going to move into a third. And this has to do with total capital. Now, October 3rd was not a derived date. And what I want to start here is with the date of October 4th. October 4th was the derived date for Bonk and Ripple. Would we hear news about the spot ETFs from Total Capital? That date of October 4th, I reshared in this video where I shared all this about Tether and Tether timeline. Before the 10th, what I understood at this point was that there was a government shutdown and there's a chance that these ETFs will not be approved by the 4th. But I did come across some news on October the 4th that had to do with XRP ETF, that had to do with Bonk ETF, but not the spot ETFs. And this title says, Total Capital delays 2x long crypto ETFs listing to October 10th. October 10th. I believe this October 4th date that was derived was supposed to lead me to this total news article where God will reveal for a third time this date of October 10th. He's emphasizing this October 10th date for a reason. And now we know why. Each event involved a question about hearing major news about XRP on October 10th, with an exception of the total capital date of October the 4th. This date led us to a date of October the 10th. So that was our third encounter. Our fourth encounter has to do with Melania Trump. On October 10th, she made an announcement saying that 8 kids displaced by Russia-Ukraine war reunited with families after Putin talks. This article says that she and Russian President Putin are communicating about children affected by the war. Apparently, there were thousands of these kids that had been displaced because of the Russia-Ukraine war. And out of thousands, only 8 was returned to their family. Now, that's good. Thank and praise God for that. That's progress. But when I heard her make this announcement, and I heard her talking about kids, and I heard her talking about the kids were taken by Russia, this reminded me of a video I put out just last week as well. Behind the Curtains, Unveiled. And in this stream, I shared how I was talking about Putin to my mom and how I hung up the phone. I looked up, Putin was watching me. I was looking over my shoulder throughout this entire dream. Then it came to the part in the dream where I saw kids sitting around this platform that these men were sitting on. And I knew these men represented the Kremlin. And so all these kids were sitting around this platform. And then in comes this lady wearing this gorgeous black dress, asking me to help her to prepare the food for the kids, wearing a dress that you wouldn't prepare lunch for kids in. The connection that I made with this dream is that October 7th showed up a lot. Putin's birthday, October 7th with Hamas and that attack on October 7th. This individual wearing this dress that I used to work with, her birthday was October 7th. And after hearing Melania's announcement, I began to think, this is my thinking, only 8 kids out of thousands released. October 7th was emphasized in that particular dream. October 7th connecting to Israel, putting it all together. Could this possibly mean that there is going to be an issue with the hostage release that we know is supposed to take place on Monday? And if there is an issue with the hostage agreement, would this ceasefire agreement crash? Because again, this announcement from Melania came on October 10th, the day that the markets crashed. Again, if this was the case, would this cause a ceasefire to crash like what we saw on October 10th? And so that would conclude the 4th time I've come across this October 10th date, making a lot of connections. I also want to say that lately I've been seeing a lot of YouTubers talking about topics that we've been discussing. Lehman Brothers, talking about bubbles being popped as it relates to the economy and the markets. And so October 10th was a hard day for the market. But at the same time, I'm sure we all took advantage of those dips, orders being filled. That's why it's good to be on more than one platform when it comes down to getting orders filled. Somewhat being spread out. I know we can't spread ourselves too thin. That's for sure. But this is just an example for those who were on Binance. They were able to get their XRP order filled at 77 cents if they had something that low put in. And so we wait for what's coming this week. Just continuing to pray about this October 17th date and preparing for this wealth transfer that I know God has for his people. Well, that's all that I have for this video. Until the next one, God bless.